Afternoon, everybody. My name is Pat Christmas, the Chief Policy Officer for the Committee of 70. So grateful you're joining us here for a stint this afternoon. We're going to talk about judicial elections. Obviously, if you live or work in the city of Philadelphia, you know we have a massive primary election this May 16th. A very large and crowded ballot. At the very top of the ballot, of course, we all know we're voting for a new mayor. Incumbent Jim Kenney is term limited. And we have 11 candidates running in the Democratic primary, one candidate in the Republican primary. So that race has taken up a lot of the oxygen, a lot of the attention, as it should. But there is a lot more up and down the ballot that voters need to be aware of. All 17 seats for city council, row offices, the register of wills, 3 city commissioners, the sheriff, 4 ballot questions, 4 proposed changes to the city's home rule charter, and judges, open seats on our appellate courts here in the state of Pennsylvania, and a bunch of open seats for local courts, our municipal court and our common pleas court. So voters have a lot of choices to make, a lot of really important choices up and down the ballot. And this afternoon, we have a couple special guests to help us think about and understand these judicial elections, why these elections matter so much, and what voters can do to prepare themselves to make choices when, especially for the judicial candidates, it can be very challenging to tell them apart, and to figure out who will be solid on the bench and who may not be so solid. So we do have a couple very special guests who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves in just a moment. Chimdi Tuffs and Matt Olesh from the Campaign for Qualified Judges. They are both associated with Philadelphia's Bar Association. And I guess to start, if we could just do quick intros, that'd be great. And how you got involved in this work and this process in the first place. Chimdi, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Chimdi Tuffs. I am an attorney here in Philadelphia. I began my career as an assistant district attorney in the district attorney's office. I am currently a partner at Feller Laurie in civil practice. Became involved with the Bar Association, as many young attorneys do, and am especially married to the issue of judges and judicial elections because of my court experience in criminal and civil court here in Philadelphia.
Awesome. All right, and Matt.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Matt Olesh. I'm a partner at Obermeyer, Redmond, Maxwell, and Hipple. I'm a commercial litigator doing primarily business litigation and disputes, although I have a pretty broad practice. I started getting involved with this issue. I was the chair of the Young Lawyers Division for the Philadelphia Bar Association, and the chair of the YLD has a seat on the Judicial Commission itself. So in I think it was 2017 at this point, I was chair and I served on the commission, and I really took an active interest at that time in what we were doing to see that the good work that the commission does meant something, and that it was actually translating into helping to get qualified candidates elected to the bench. And so I got involved with the campaign, and I've been involved ever since.
Awesome. So here, let's start with this. When I first registered to vote here in Philly, I had no idea we elected judges. Surely, when I first saw a ballot at a polling place where there were judicial candidates, I wasn't ready to make a decision or choice of any sort, to be honest with you. So, can we start with just how do we elect judges here in the state? Because other states don't elect judges at all. And this is we're not going to have a conversation about different judicial selection systems, but just how do these elections work, both for local judges and state judges? Chimdi,
sure. So I'll start there. So, judging by our audience, some of this might be rudimentary for some, but just to kind of break it down, here in Pennsylvania, all state and local judges are elected. So speaking specifically about our courts here in Philadelphia and those that govern this jurisdiction, we have our state Supreme Court of 7 justices. That's our highest court. We then have the appellate courts, so Superior Court and Commonwealth Court. We have the Court of Common Pleas. Those are state courts. Then we have our municipal court and traffic court as our local courts. But Pennsylvania holds judicial elections in odd numbered years, so this being one of them. And it's important to know that judges serve 10-year terms or 6-year terms if you're talking about municipal court and traffic court in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia specifically. So those elections, they're elected, they're not appointed, they are elected through partisan elections and subsequent re-elections for reappointment or retention. So when we talk about why that's important, as you mentioned, not all states elect their judges. Pennsylvania, I believe, is one of 8 that does. Other jurisdictions have different ways of electing judges or of appointing judges, either through vetting processes and so forth. However, in Pennsylvania, if you are admitted to the bar in Pennsylvania and you have the requisite amount of signatures, you're able to be on the ballot to run for judge. That's in that initial election. So we're talking about that first initial election. If you run for judge, it essentially becomes somewhat of a lifetime appointment, because after that 10-year term, when you run for retention, the process for that is simply, should this person stay a judge? Yes or no. Not a lot of lay people have a lot of information about who those people are or why they should or shouldn't remain judges. And typically most people get retained. So if we're talking about why that matters, of course, that initial election is our opportunity to vet who we want to serve as judges in our community, because after that, they pretty much remain judges. So what Matt and I are here to do is educate the public on, what should go into that determination and what thought, we should all give to, who should be on the bench. It's an important decision, and it has a lasting impact almost indefinitely. So like I said before, the only requirements to run for judge initially would be that you're admitted to the bar and you have the requisite signatures. What then happens is the ballot is created essentially by lottery, meaning that the names that appear on the judicial ballot that you'll see on May 16th would be listed essentially randomly. And what tends to happen, or what has happened in the past, is that those names at the top of the ballot typically get elected. So those are the people who end up becoming judges. And that's because, like Pat, like you said at the beginning, it's a heavy ballot here. We have a lot of candidates running. So when people select, who they want as judges, they typically select the first few names on the list. Of course, we would like for there to be more thought given to this process than that. And, some other courts, as we were speaking about before, like in New Jersey, they use a confirmation process involving the governor and the legislature. Some hold nonpartisan elections. Some states use like a merit selection process where they decide, a group of attorneys or the government or the governor would create some sort of commission that decides who's qualified enough to be appointed to a judgeship. We don't have that in Pennsylvania. And, that's why it's so important to pay attention to who's running for judge and have some knowledge of, what their qualifications are. When we're talking about the May 16th ballot, specifically, there are 4 candidates running for Supreme Court for 1 spot. In Superior Court, we have 2 open seats and 5 people running. Commonwealth Court, there are 4 candidates and 1 open seat. Common Pleas Court, where voters will choose up to 10 candidates, there are 22 candidates running for judge of Court of Common Pleas in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia specifically. And in the municipal court, we have 10 candidates running for 2 open spots.
So those numbers you just mentioned ballot position. I'm glad you brought up ballot position at the beginning of this for this conversation, because it is a significant factor. It's a measurable factor, and I guess to some extent you got to expect voters are going to go top left, and whichever names are there cast more ballots that direction. I guess with the numbers you just gave, it's clear enough. There's a difference here, I guess, between the local judicial elections where there are going to be a few seats and sometimes dozens of candidates. And of course, that's where it's really, really difficult for folks to tell some of these folks apart. And they're almost entirely Democrats. I'm not even sure if anyone's cross-filing Democrat and Republican this primary. But I guess what I'll suggest is like a lot of the ball game, if not the whole ball game, for our local trial courts will be this spring. For the appellate courts, that's going to be very different. And the general elections in the fall are going to matter a great deal. So Could you talk a little bit more about I guess the appellate races in particular, and the obviously we have Democrats and Republicans running this primary, but then what this may look like through the general election, and then why in particular those elections are so high stakes, and we're going to see a lot of money spent around those races through the fall.
Good point. So I think there is what, just backing up a little bit, there is one candidate who I believe is running under both party designations for municipal court.
Okay.
But what typically happens and why it's so important now to focus on the judicial election here in May and not necessarily in November is because, you know, Philadelphia is a largely Democratic city. I think all of the candidates for common pleas court are Democrats running. And, you know, this is why this is the time to focus in the Democratic primary on what's going to happen with those elections. Specifically, when we talk about the appellate courts, it's important because, you know, like I said, these elections are partisan. And one thing to keep in mind is who's qualified in the you know, when you have so many more people to select from, who's qualified to stand up in November under election then, when those state courts are more of a factor. So when we're talking about the Superior Court and the higher courts, not necessarily just the lower courts. So those things are important too, because judicial elections determine not only, and judges don't only just determine things that happen in Philadelphia, but when we're talking about those higher courts, they're making a lot of important decisions, appellate decisions. So appealing those lower courts and making decisions that impact the entire state. I think we've seen in you know, recent months how as things go up the chain, they become more and more important and gain more and more attention. Those judges at the lower level instigate that, and as the chain goes up, we see maybe, you know, if we're having judges that are unqualified, more you know, appellate decisions or more important appellate decisions that the state is facing, you know, as we look at what are the pressing issues not just in Pennsylvania, but, you know, across the country.
And just for the lay person, like of the three appellate courts, the Superior Court hears appeals on criminal matters of various sorts generally, right? And then there's that Commonwealth Court hears, you know, either disputes between private citizens or groups and the government, or pieces of the government that have some sort of, you know, argument. And those matters from either of those can also then get appealed to the Supreme Court, I guess, at the very top of the food chain. Is that generally the...
Yes, that's correct. So when we're looking at the Commonwealth Court, so dealing with state actors and state issues there, and then the Superior Court, those decisions then get appealed to the Supreme Court as the highest court. So that's how, you know, the structure works judicially.
Yeah, you know, when we scheduled this conversation, we didn't realize, at least at 70, that Wisconsin was going to have also an epic election today. Whoever wins this election, Wisconsin will determine the tilt of their Supreme Court, which I guess we didn't list any issues in particular, but I mean, it could be almost anything, right? Elections and voting rights, gerrymandering, emergency powers during a pandemic. I mean, it's just an immense amount of power that can sometimes get decided through the judiciary, and especially, you know, the buck stops at the very top of that judiciary. Okay, all right, Chimdi, that's perfect. I think the stakes are immense. I think that's fair to say. The stakes are immense.
Very true.
So we have all these candidates to kind of sort out and figure out who would be, you know, who would be solid on the bench, whatever those qualifications would be. Matt, could you walk us through you know, how the Philadelphia Bar Association goes about that work, and even, you know, Frank, again, for like some lay people out there, like what the Bar Association, you know, is.
Absolutely. So the Bar Association is the trade association for lawyers in the city. It works to for the benefit of lawyers in the city, but also for the benefit of the public and the public interest. It certainly has a vested interest, a very strong vested interest in the quality of our judiciary as a result. You know, we are a trade association, but we want to do whatever we can to protect equal justice, to protect equal treatment under the law, equal rights. And the judiciary, as you were just noting, is a critically important part of that. So we really do, the association does all it can to support the judiciary, to support the independence of judges in making their decisions, but also when it comes time for the election of judges, as we're going through right now, to evaluate the candidates as much as it can and help educate and inform the public as to the qualifications of the candidates for judge. So the association has what's called its Judicial Commission, and the Judicial Commission is a group that meets and evaluates all of the candidates. I should step back. The process really is undertaken when candidates first decide they want to run for judge. There is a questionnaire that is publicly available on the Bar Association's website. And I'll just note that pretty much all of what we're going to be talking about here today in terms of the Judicial Commission and its work is all available on the Philadelphia Bar Association's website. If you just Google Philadelphia Bar Association Judicial Commission, it'll come right up and you can access all of this information in written form. And we'll try to give the high level overview here today. But the process to evaluate a judicial candidate really begins when the candidate submits an application to be reviewed. It's a pretty extensive questionnaire. There are different questionnaires available for the local judges in common pleas and municipal courts and also the appellate court candidates. And we'll talk about the review of those candidates as well. Once a questionnaire is received, an investigation team is formed. The Bar Association's commission has an investigative body, which is, I believe, up to 120 people deep. At any given time, it could be that number of folks on the investigation body. And the bylaws for the commission state that 1/3 of the investigation team, the people available to conduct investigations must be lay people, non-attorneys. And hopefully you'll note that that's a theme throughout this process, is that we just don't want this to be lawyers evaluating lawyers. The judiciary has obviously a critical impact on many people's lives here in the city, and we want the perspective of the general public and non-lawyers, because that's important to consider when we're talking about who should be a judge. Every investigation team that's constituted upon the receipt of a questionnaire will have at least one non-attorney on it. So the investigation team is formed, and the investigation team goes about really mining the questionnaire, mining publicly available information, and really doing whatever it can to get all information possible on a candidate. They will contact opposing counsel in cases. They will contact coworkers. They will contact judges. They will contact anyone who has had relevant experience with a candidate to really learn everything they can about that candidate and whether the candidate is qualified and meets all the criteria for to be rated, recommended, or highly recommended by the association. I'll talk about the criteria soon. The investigation team will also talk to the candidate themselves and have an interview, address any concerns that have been raised during the investigation, give the candidate an opportunity to speak in support of their candidacy and state why they believe they meet all of the qualifications that are set forth by the commission. The investigation team will present to the commission itself, and I'll talk about the commission and who makes up the commission, who sits on the commission. But the investigation team will present its findings to the commission. Following that, the candidate themselves would have the opportunity to address the commission. The commission will have another opportunity to speak and address any concerns, ask questions, whatever they need to speak about with the candidate. And then the commission will discuss and hold a vote. And the results of the vote result in a rating, either highly recommended, recommended, or not recommended. And those results are posted publicly on our website, which is electqualifiedjudges.com. And that is a very abbreviated high level overview of the process. It is an extremely intense process, and part of what I'm most proud of about the commission, and really what we try to tout, is the process itself, that it's a very objective, well thought out and spelled out process. There's really it's the same process for every candidate. It's the same set of criteria for every candidate. And the goal is to really evaluate each candidate on their merits. We don't have a slate. We don't say, oh, there's 10 open spots for common pleas, so we're going to rate 10 people recommended or highly recommended. It's each candidate in a vacuum. Is this person qualified to be sitting as a judge?
Could you, yeah, actually, and that what I should have noted at the outset of this conversation, I guess I'll note it now in full disclosures. Yeah, I happen to be a member of this commission for this particular year. Yes. So it's been I can vouch for the seriousness, the rigor, and the intensity of the process, especially for the candidates. It is like you said, the candidate questionnaire, the investigative work, and the background interviews that are held. It's quite rigorous. And you mentioned there are criteria that are set out and that have been set out for years that have been pretty consistent. Could you walk us through? I mean, maybe not all 10, but what some of those criteria are that the commission keeps in mind as they evaluate each of these folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll run through them briefly. Again, they're all listed on the website, the standards for evaluation of candidates, and each one has even more detail as to what specifically is looked at for the candidates. But it's legal ability, trial and courtroom experience, character and integrity, excuse me, financial responsibility, temperament. Does the person have the right temperament that exhibits a judicial temperament? Mental and physical capacity sufficient to discharge the duties of judicial office, community involvement, administrative ability, devotion to the improvement of the quality of justice, and sound judgment in one's professional life. And those are the standards by which every candidate is evaluated on. I will also note, and Pat, as you know, when you're voting to give a rating to a candidate, if you're going to vote not recommended, each person voting must check off which criteria they believe the candidate does not meet. Because this needs to be a process where we're informed by what's before it, by the evidence that's unearthed and discussed by the investigation team and the commission, and also to give feedback to the candidates and say, this is, if you're not recommended, these are the criteria that you are not meeting. There have been instances in the past where candidates were not recommended in the past and then have come back before the commission in a subsequent cycle. They were gotten the feedback on which criteria was not met, and they were subsequently recommended after working on it and getting to the point where they now satisfy that criteria. So
I think that's important to note, that they're told what, the reason for their rating. So it's not something that's held in secret and not, discussed with them. It's available if they contact the commission, I believe.
Yeah.
right.
I guess I'll add on to that. Although it's not listed explicitly and separately as a criterion and or even a value, but a candidate's understanding of, acknowledgement of, commitment to addressing implicit bias, both on their own part, and the way implicit bias comes up in a courtroom or throughout the system is raised consistently, as is these folks. Kind of same thing, understanding of, acknowledgement of, commitment to addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, again within their courtroom and across the system. So that's also come up every background interview and every conversation with candidates along the way. So yeah, very rigorous process, and it's really months of work on behalf of the Bar Association staff, the Judicial Commission members, and the volunteers who conduct these background interviews. And then Matt, you described briefly the folks who are on the commission. There are, as you said, like there's a mix of lawyers and lay people, and they're designated slots for a number of different institutions across the city, right? And it's could you go a bit further about who was in this room when these conversations were had?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think we really try to ensure that a lot of a diverse set of voices are heard in that room. And as you said, it includes lawyers, it includes designated seats for non-lawyers. We want to make sure that we're really hearing as many voices as possible, representative of the population of the city. There are appointments that are done by the chancellor and the folks who are on any given year in charge of the Philadelphia Bar Association. There is a chair and a vice chair of the commission itself that's appointed, who are sitting, usually they're attorneys. The district attorney has a spot, the city solicitor has a spot, the chief defender for the Defenders Association. There are public interest organizations that are represented, including community legal services. Various sections of the Bar Association have either their chair or a representative on the commission to ensure that there's perspective from various points from the different areas of law that are practiced in the courts. Because when you're elected to be a judge, you're not running for, I'm going to be a criminal judge, I'm going to be a civil judge, I'm going to be a family law judge. You're elected to be a judge, and you're assigned where you're assigned. So having all those perspectives of the different areas of law that are practiced in the courts is really helpful. As I mentioned, the YLD, the Young Lawyers Division, has a seat on the commission. There is a seat for the LGBT Rights Committee, the Barristers Association, the Women in the Profession Committee, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association, Hispanic Bar Association, South Asian Bar Association, the National Bar Association, the Clifford Scott Green chapter, the Judicial Council of the National Bar Association. And then we have sitting judges, the president judges of the common pleas and municipal courts are on there. And then we have appointed members who are not attorneys as well. I don't think I covered every single member of the commission, but just to give an idea of really how wide we try to cast the net to ensure that there's representation from a variety of perspectives on there.
Yeah. Large group, and like you described, it is a lengthy and rigorous process. All right. So I think we have a sense. The stakes are high. These offices matter a great deal. Lots of choices, and we have this bar association process to help evaluate and issue ratings for these candidates and help voters decide. So this is the part then that both of you have a leadership role with the campaign for qualified judges, which I guess it's that's basically the bar association's effort and endeavor to get the word out there about these ratings and to explain the process. Right. So could y'all, I guess, jump all here, whoever can talk a little bit about what you all have been up to get these ratings out there and help Philippines know that this information is available.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I always fear when we speak to folks, which is a lot of what we try to do in the lead up to the election, is talk to really whoever will listen to us about judicial elections and whoever has either a vote or influence over voters. One of the main things we want to do is have conversations like this one we're having today, where we talk about the process and talk about the work that goes into this. And I always fear that we're trying to be succinct in how we describe it, but it really can sell it. I don't want to sell it short, and we don't want to sell it short on how, as you mentioned, how really involved and detailed of a process. It's a real deep dive into each candidate and the number of hours that goes into it. I think we calculated this year that it's something like 1,900 hours in total in terms of everyone's time together, which is like the equivalent of an attorney's billable year, which is kind of crazy to think about. But it just shows, how much work goes into getting what we have as the output, which is the list of judges that are rated the various ratings. And yeah, it's our job as being involved with the campaign, which is the Bar Association's PAC, to do everything we can to promote the ratings, explain the ratings, explain the process, and just, hope translate them into actual results so that we have qualified judges sitting on the bench. So what we've been doing, in addition to speaking with people, A few years ago, we started to really get back out there at polling places, and I think we're going to try to do that again this year, is to have people at polling places handing out the ratings, and also we have other direct outreach to voters. We speak to wards, we speak to civic associations. What else? I'm blanking. What else?
We have a good amount of social media
Yes.
efforts to also, get out the word about the list itself. And just to add on to what Matt was saying, what we're trying to do is to promote the list itself and not necessarily tell people, who specifically on that list you should vote for. It's more that we're trying to make sure that when people go into the ballot box, when they have the opportunity to look at who's running and who they're going to vote for, that they've looked at that list to see who's recommended, who's highly recommended, and that gives them, a basis of information for which to vote, because, a bunch of community members and attorneys have spent 1,900 hours pouring through information to provide them with that list. It's not just, something to throw in the trash if it comes to you in the mail. It's more, information for you that you need, even if, it may not seem, to be, that full of information. There's plenty of information that we've sifted through to create it.
Got it. So I guess the last kind of question or topic is what will your guidance be to voters, both individual voters, but also civic and community leaders out there who have networks and constituencies that they can reach with this information. I mean, that's the challenge here is getting this stuff out there so that voters can utilize it. So what would be your calls to action, I guess, for the folks who are viewing this at home?
I think for my end, it would be to go to qualifiedjudges.com and look at the list itself. And if you see names on there, maybe that you recognize or don't, feel free to use that list as a guideline. And there's opportunity and time now to do your own research if you'd like to. But we, are simply promoting and, the endorsement of those people who've been recommended or highly recommended to allow for people to, hopefully give them their vote, since, they are the most qualified candidates running. We're happy to, continue going to ward meetings or make other kinds of appearances to, get the word out about this even more.
Yeah, I would say, and certainly all of that, absolutely. And when you go to the website, when you see the ratings, we would urge people and voters to really consider starting with the highly recommended candidates. There are 5 for Common Pleas this year. And that's what I always try to impress upon folks. I mean, the standard to reach a highly recommended rating is, it's a high bar. And Pat, as you know, in that room, I mean, it's a high voting threshold, and it's really reserved for, as the standards state, the extraordinary individuals who are preeminent in the profession, exceptionally skilled at law, and a reputation for utmost integrity, and will significantly enhance the quality of the judiciary if they have not already. So, for this cycle, there's 10 vacancies in Common Pleas. We would urge folks to consider starting with the 5 highly recommended candidates and then choosing another 5 from the list of recommended. Fortunately, with Common Pleas, there's a lot to choose from who are recommended. And then municipal court, there's slightly more recommended than not recommended, but again, we would say, choose your 2 candidates from the list of recommended candidates. And, we would urge everyone to do that, to tell others to do that. We are always available to answer questions that anyone has about the process. We can't speak to, and frankly, we don't have information about the process undertaken as to a specific candidate. As you know, that's the process itself, and then what goes into it and what's discussed is confidential, and that's really for the benefit of the candidates themselves. The candidates are given insight into what reasons there are if they're not recommended, and the candidates are free to divulge that to whoever they want to, but we have agreed to confidentiality for the candidates' benefit. With that being said, we are always available to talk about the process, to answer questions, to take feedback. I mean, one of the things I really enjoy doing when speaking to people is to get feedback about what concerns people have about the process or concerns about the association and the commission, because there are concerns that people have conveyed, and we've taken those to heart and considered them. And you know, nothing is ever perfect. We want to do the best thing that we can do, and we always recognize that there's room to get better. But we do believe that we have a really great process in place, and frankly, under the circumstances and given what we have resource-wise, I mean, as you know, this is pretty much an all-volunteer process, and I think it does a pretty darn good job to arrive at a list that voters can choose from.
Like I've said before, it's got to be important if you have a bunch of lawyers working for free.
I love that, guys. This is perfect. Chimdi and Matt, thanks so much for taking this time with us this afternoon. We are going to have to bring you back, I think, after the primary, because as we discussed, like there's a lot to vote on this spring, both at the local trial court and the appellate level. But we are going to have huge elections in the fall as well for those appellate seats, and for folks who are catching headlines, national headlines. Wisconsin is at the top of that list right now, just because of the way our politics and our government has kind of shifted over time. There are some pretty big debates between the branches, and the courts have been very much wrapped up in that, being one of the three branches. So thanks so much for folks at home. You have still lots of time, not all the time in the world, but a lot of time to get ready for May 16th. As a reminder, we have closed primaries here in Pennsylvania. That means Democratic voters can only vote for Democratic candidates, Republican voters only for Republican candidates. If you're not a registered D or R, you can't vote for any candidates until the fall November general election, for what it's worth. So if you're here in the city of Philadelphia, for example, you know, D or R, there are more candidate choices on the Democratic side of the ledger, just kind of the way the city politics are. But that's something to be mindful of as you're getting ready to check your voter registration. And if you're going to vote in person, obviously always check your polling place. If you are going to vote by mail, which is a great way to do this, especially when you will have such a crowded ballot to review and make choices on. The deadline to apply for that mail-in ballot is May 9th, 7 days before the election. And I would urge everyone, and especially if you're watching this, urge the people you know, because you're probably doing this already. If you're going to change your voter registration, do it now. If you're going to apply for a mail-in ballot, do it now. Do not wait, especially if you're going to vote by mail. Do not wait. Otherwise, you'll be under the gun to get that ballot back in time. So thanks again so much for joining us. Again, find the Philadelphia Bar Association's Judicial Commission, very easy on Google. Track down these ratings and use them this spring.
Pat, can I give one more
Yeah.
quick plug is if anyone is interested in volunteering at the polls on election day to hand out the ratings, we need all the help we can get. The more volunteers we have, the more people we can reach as they're about to vote, which I think is always one of the best ways to get in front of voters and hopefully get them to consider what you want them to consider. So you can reach out to Chimdi, you can reach out to me. My email address is my name. It's just matthew.olesh@obermeyer.com. Or you can Google us. You can find any lawyer's email address pretty much by Googling them these days very easily. But yeah, if anyone would like to help with that effort, we're about to really ramp up our volunteer outreach. And, you know, we've always had great success from the public, lawyers, non-lawyers, folks who want to help us out. So please consider that.
Awesome. All righty. We'll sign off there. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.